if self-control is attached to the right source of kind of motivators, should it be hard? Is it always hard? And is there something there that we should question and then change?
Well, there's no question. Again, you've heard me say this a couple of times, and you've questioned the use of the word trick, right?
Yes.
The idea is simply this. I think when we have a good understanding of what's happening in our thinking and mind and brain, what we realize is we're able to develop what I term super self-control,
True.
right? Or another way of describing that is high efficacy. In other words, it's very effective and low effort. And
Ideal.
ideally,
Yeah.
if self-control is such an integral part of any success, we would like it to be as efficient and effective and consistent as possible. So there's absolutely no question, as we relate to that, there will be times when there is a level of fatigue or there is a level of temptation where even the most well-anchored intrinsic self-control can be difficult, right? Either because something is so incredibly tempting or so incredibly threatening. Okay. But what you'll find is if you're able to intrinsically motivate with the things that will come up in the discussion now, the trick, as it were, what you'll find is that there is much less need for repetitive acts of self-control. The first one is sufficient, and we're moving on to whatever else it was that was required. So there's an efficiency not only in the ease with which we can end up making a decision, but the frequency of the decisions that need to be made. So because self-control is inherently so difficult for most people in most things, it's why we would really, really need to understand, again, some sort of flick of a switch or something that we could anchor that motivation in to get us to act in line with better judgment. So I would often, and again, a lot of the terminology that I use is just terminology that I've sort of, utilized over the years. So oftentimes I will explain it. I very seldom ever talk about willpower. In fact, I guess even in as long as you've known me, I've probably not said willpower, a handful of times maybe. And it's usually in a context like this saying, willpower for me is that sense of I've got to grab that crowbar and literally crank up and muster all that I can to sort of, open up a gap for me to see why would this be worth me giving up on something that is instantly satisfying or grinding out having to do something right now that, man, I really don't feel like doing. If you find yourself having to do that, it's just a matter of time before you give in. And I've explained already in one of the other videos why that usually is a fairly slippery slope. So the bottom line is this. When we look at the two parts, and when I say parts, I'm talking functional units, sort of neural circuits. So it's, components of the brain that are, yes, related to the anatomy, but also related to how they interconnect in sort of a compartmentalized or modular fashion. They work together to basically drive our assessment of things, make a case for what's best. I think, as we're able to understand those things and what makes things difficult and what allows for things to be easy or easier, it allows us to become much better at developing super self-control. So here's how I would look at it. If we look at the brain, and I use that description of, again, miss, that impulsive side, my instant satisfaction seeker, that's the one that's calling for, forget about the future, forget about what, take the easy route, take the satisfying route, take advantage of what's on offer. That's that part of the brain that I know all of us can relate to. Why? Because the whole environment of the world, online as well as just generally, is set up to appeal to that side of the brain. Why? Because that's what we're willing to trade money for.
Yes.
Bottom line.
That's where consumerism
That's
comes in.
consumerism. It comes down at the end of the day to, if you can, I'm willing to pay, I'm representing humanity here, right? Willing to pay for something that's satisfying. The question is what I'm paying for genuinely satisfying or worth it compared to other things that I may have, or worth the cost down the line? Nothing for nothing. I'm either going to pay now or I'm going to pay later. Whatever it is, I'm going to pay with energy and effort now and reap the rewards down the line, or I'm going to pay something now, right? That might be financial or something else, and I'm going to suffer the consequences down the line. Nothing for nothing in life. Okay. So when I look at that part of the brain, the world is feeding that side, which immediately, if we just left it there, will tell us why self-control is so difficult. Because that part wants instant satisfaction, and it's not thinking about the consequences. It's not thinking about future reward of things more valuable. So the other part is the part that's developing later on in life, mid-20s and that sort of thing, which loosely I would say is prefrontal cortex and those components, the areas where we think and calculate, and the higher executive functions and the calculations, and what we know is the main area where we exercise self-control. But that part of the brain is massively energy dependent, which is why typically as we go through a day of saying no to this, or not getting angry with this person, or saying no to that temptation, as the day progresses, right, this part of the brain fatigues, and we're inclined to default to that impulsive part, which is why most of the things that would be, sort of acts of lacking self-control or impulsive, instantly gratifying things typically happen in the latter part of the days, or at night, or when we're fatigued, that kind of thing. So when we depend on this part of the brain, the one that is looking to the future and future value, as the one that, in essence, if you could picture it like this, you've got this miss trying to make a case for what's most satisfying, and you've got fuss trying to make a case for most satisfying, to the mind that is deciding simply, I'm just going to pick whatever's best. Whoever presents the best case, that's what I'm going to choose. That's the picture that I sort of described when I wrote the book, Something Bigger. It's the idea that you've got these two lawyers, each trying to make a case, each trying to win the judge over in favor of what they are presenting as being maximally satisfying. So you've got this part of the brain here, my instant part, that is drawing attention. It's right there in front of you. Smell it, look at it, see it. You know how satisfying this is. That part of the brain doesn't require a tremendous amount of energy. The world's feeding it. And you've got this other part that is trying to make such a strong case for why that's a bad decision, or why that's not ultimately what you want. And again, as soon as you add emotion, as soon as you add something sensory, as soon as you add something to that equation that is immediately attractive, it becomes very, very difficult for that part of the brain that looks to the future, to the goal, to go ahead and say, you know what, it's still the best thing to forego the instant satisfaction, or it's definitely the best thing to do the hard work now because of the reward down the line. The brain is just structured, wired, fueled in the kind of way that becomes incredibly difficult to sustain. So that's an intrinsic problem with all of its physiology that goes with that. The environment, no matter which way you cut it, is set up for impulsivity. That's just, for the most part, that is how it's set up, online and in our world, right? So we look at that and we say, okay, people have approached that with the idea that if I can make a goal so attractive, so appealing, that in that moment, it's attractive enough to say no to whatever the impulsive thing, whether it be alcohol, or whether it be whatever's on the screen, or whether it be the food, or whatever else it is, or the not having to exert effort for sake of the comfort of now. If I can make the goal that attractive by making it this dream big kind of thing and so awesome, then it can compete in the moment. Now, the irony is, while you're setting up that goal, the part of the brain that's heavily on board is the impulsive part. That's why it's so exciting, because it's momentarily exciting as I think about how cool this is going to be. But the moment the work and the effort and the time delay is incorporated into that, this part of the brain forgets that very, very quickly. So oftentimes setting the kinds of goals that really excite you in the moment, they oftentimes, unless they are supported, the actions required to bring about those goals are supported by something much more stable, we end up literally just heightening our expectation and increasing the sense of failure when we don't achieve. So again, there are many things that we try and fix that ultimately end up becoming counterproductive. And that's something that I really try and guard people against. So here's the trick. Here's the trick. Can I get miss to compete with itself? Can I, when I'm in a cool, calm, collected state, when I'm not hot-headed, when I'm not switched off to everything, but I am thinking, a little bit more clearly, and I'm not massively tempted by something, and I'm in a state where I can see value for what it is rather than, something that is influenced by diminishing time or work. I have to put in time and effort. It diminishes the value, right? When I'm seeing things for what they are, can I persuade myself that doing what's required, the plan, the good decision to bring about a future outcome, which both parts of the brain are happy to agree is more valuable, right, in this moment. It is more valuable to be healthy, and it is more valuable to, take care of my health and, lose weight and, put in the effort into my relationship and work hard so that I can find it is more valuable ultimately. We know that, as you said, we know that. But if I can say the actions required are not motivated by the outcome, but are motivated by a reason, and the difference is this: the work required here to bring about something that I may or may not get in the future, the uncertainty of the future and the distance there to, is enough to discount the value. Whereas if I do what I do for a reason, in other words, I do it out of something that I already have, well, what's that? That's my identity. That's my morality. Those are my values. Those are my responsibilities. So I distinguish these things in such a way. The way you get miss to actually start working for your goals is to feel miss with the motivation that comes from what is immediately at stake. If I am motivated to go ahead and do this thing for a person, which means taking my time, taking my energy, and I'm having to forego something that could be fun right now. I'm not going to go ahead and play around a golf right now. I'm going to give my time to this particular person who is struggling, and I'm doing that only for some future outcome. I promise you, I'm going to default and play golf, pretty soon. But if I'm saying I'm willing to sacrifice that, not indefinitely, because the reason is my role and my responsibility to my patients or to my family is such that that's who I am. So I will do what's required right now for the reason that it allows me to be consistent with who I am and what I believe deeply on my
So I'm
responsibilities.
just gonna ask you there,
Yes.
when you are acting in line with identity,
Yes.
does the miss have the kick immediately as well? So I just want to
Absolutely.
emphasize that there is no sense of loss because you're actually not, right? I just want to emphasize this.
100%. I said before that and I say this on, there are 6 things according to my mind map that make us unhappy. The fourth one is what we call incongruency or inconsistency, right? Or contradiction. If we are clear on who we are in terms of identity, and that's a whole other discussion because I think many people are not, which is why the trick depends on great clarity on my purpose, on my person, on my responsibilities, on my all of these things. If it's going to be anchored
What's
to
worth
something,
pursuing really
it
in life?
best
Yeah.
be an anchor. I can't hook it to something that's wishy-washy that I think maybe. So it's rooted in something that is a conviction. I describe it as a person who is exercising self-control from conviction. That person is usually able to exercise self-control very clearly, very decisively, very efficiently, and is able to keep doing that. Now, I do believe that Miss desperately wants the instant satisfaction, not only of the consistency of behaving in line with what is immediately. If I break what I am right now, I say I'm an honest person. The moment I lie, which is now, I've got to question that. So we're inclined now again to remove the time delay. And by doing that for reason, it's now, it's in the moment. I am this person. I can't say I am this person and act inconsistently with it. That creates a cognitive dissonance. That creates incongruence. That creates hypocrisy. The brain hates that. The mind and the brain hate the idea that I'm not consistent with who I think or believe that I am. So I'm massively drawing on that. In other words, when a person feels guilty, guilt is only ever the consequence of having done something I believe is wrong or I believe is unfair. Now, whether you're rightly informed or how you're informed as to what you think is right or wrong is a whole other discussion. But that is why people will die for what they believe. When they're going into that, it's not the goal. I'm looking forward to dying for what I believe, right? Unless they
It's a
consider that
consequence of
it
acting
is,
on the
absolutely, it is the extreme consequence of the ultimate loss for something that is consistent with who I am, with what I believe my purpose is, with who I say this. I mean, and I actually fully believe it. If I was sitting here right now with my wife and my 3 girls, and somebody walked in with a gun and they said, one of you's got to go, I wouldn't hesitate. And I don't even think I would be afraid. The sheer delight of being able to sacrifice everything that I am for everything that they are to me, it's a no-brainer. And guess what's motivating that? Miss working in conjunction with fuss.
It's an instant.
That is the trick. It is an instant satisfaction. So in essence, I need to find the kinds of things that I'm aware of that are instantly satisfying, okay, that are meaningful enough for me to give up on things that in the bigger scheme of life and my better judgment are inconsequential. Inconsequential in the bigger scheme of things. And that's why people oftentimes sit with such regret. If
Yes.
only I had done this. I knew, I should have known, I could have. And they beat themselves up because they acted inconsistently with what they knew, right? And that was because in the moment, they were not linking the required behavior to what they genuinely believed. So it's oftentimes in those cases where a person undergoes what I call forgetfulness failure. I think it's entirely possible for people of great conviction in states of fatigue and in states of difficulty to become forgetful at times of even the things that are most important. How do I know that? When they fall, they have a great sense of remorse. They have a great sense of regret. They don't try and justify it. They don't try and say, I'll shuffle my beliefs around to align the things. I was inconsistent, but, I actually wasn't. No, they own it. It hurts them. It weighs on them. And that's the pain they are trying to avoid by doing what's required. So that is exactly what the mind and brain are aware of. The brain hates the weight of hypocrisy. The mind and brain hate the weight of, again, inconsistency. So one of the ways in which, again, the part of the brain in the world have made it possible for us to bypass that is to kill any sense of who you really are. I'm amazed as to how many people I sit with now who have no real sense of purpose, no real sense of conviction about anything.
Yes.
And for that reason, they are floating around with zero hope, right? The hope is, again, it's an anticipation or an expectation of something that's good to come. And sometimes that's what fuss is clinging to. It's saying it's worth going through all the difficulties right now because in the end, it's going to be worth it. That's fuss arguing that, unless it's tied with the identity that's part of that. So again, I'm going to be most super self-controlled when I'm doing what I do for a reason that is not entirely linked to an outcome. They are linked, usually, right? But the outcome is not the motivating driving force.